Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The silver moon rose slowly above the horizon, its pale light casting long, eerie shadows over the land. For centuries, the rise of the silver moon had been a signal, a call to arms for the silver moon knights. It was said that when the silver moon reached its peak, the veil between worlds thinned, and monstrous creatures from other realms, the Veilspawn, would pour into their world, bringing chaos and destruction. The Silver Moon Knights were the first and last line of defense against these otherworldly horrors. Elias stood on the ridge just beyond the training grounds, watching as the moon climbed higher into the sky. His armor gleamed dully in the moonlight, though the breastplate still felt foreign and heavy on his shoulders. This was his first night as a full-fledged member of the Silver Moon Knights, but already, a deep knot of unease coiled in his gut. He had trained for years for this moment, honing his swordsmanship, learning the ancient techniques that had been passed down through generations of knights, but now, as the hour drew near, his hands trembled at his sides. Behind him, the knights were preparing. The clatter of steel being sharpened, the steady murmur of voices, and the rhythmic sound of horses being saddled filled the air, all part of the nightly ritual when the Silver Moon Knights assembled. Elias turned to watch them, trying to focus on the movements of the seasoned knights around him. Sir Alistair, his mentor, moving with calm precision as he fastened his gauntlets, Commander Valeria giving orders in her low, steady voice, but the doubt gnawed at him. Could he really face the Veilspawn? He had seen drawings in the old tomes, grotesque, shadowy figures with limbs that twisted at unnatural angles, eyes that gleamed with malicious hunger, but hearing about them was different from meeting them in the flesh. Elias swallowed hard, his throat dry, as he felt the weight of his sword at his hip. The blade, though finely crafted, suddenly seemed inadequate against the terrors that awaited them. Elias. He jumped slightly at the sound of Sir Alistair's voice. The older knight approached him, his face stern but not unkind. The silver in his beard caught the moonlight as he laid a hand on Elias's shoulder. "It's normal to be nervous before your first battle," Alistair said, his voice low. "Fear keeps you sharp. But don't let it control you." Elias nodded, though the knot in his stomach tightened. He wanted to say something, to confess the depths of his anxiety, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he focused on the ground at his feet, the dirt and gravel beneath his boots, and tried to steady his breathing. "You've trained well," Alistair continued. "You wouldn't be here if you weren't ready." "But what if I'm not?" Elias thought, his mind racing. "What if I fail?" Alistair seemed to sense his unease. He gave Elias's shoulder a firm squeeze before stepping back. "Stay close to me when the fighting starts. Remember your training. And above all, trust your instincts. They'll guide you better than anything else." Elias nodded again, forcing himself to meet Alistair's gaze. The older knight's eyes were hard but steady, the kind of eyes that had seen countless battles, faced countless horrors, and lived to tell the tale. Elias envied that calm confidence, the certainty that came with experience. He wanted to believe that one day, he too would wear that same look. "Mount up." Commander Valeria's voice rang out across the training grounds, snapping Elias back to the present. The knights moved as one, a well-practiced machine, each man and woman knowing their place. Elias followed suit, moving toward his horse, a sleek, black stallion with eyes that shone with quiet intelligence. He swung up into the saddle, his armor clanking slightly as he adjusted his weight. The stallion shifted beneath him, sensing his unease, and Elias took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. Around him, the other knights were mounting their horses, forming into tight lines. The silver moon hung high overhead now, its light bathing the landscape in a ghostly glow. The trees along the horizon stood like silent sentinels, their branches swaying gently in the night breeze. "Tonight, we ride to the eastern villages," Valeria said, her voice carrying over the assembled knights. "Reports have come in of Veilspawn sightings near the border. Our mission is simple: drive them back into the rift, protect the villagers, and ensure no harm comes to the realm." Elias's heart thudded in his chest. This was it. His first real mission as a Silver Moon Knight. "We move out." Valeria called. The knights spurred their horses into motion, the sound of hooves thundering against the earth as they charged forward into the night. Elias rode near the middle of the formation, just behind Alistair, his grip tight on the reins. The cold air whipped past his face, stinging his cheeks, but he barely noticed. His mind was consumed with thoughts of the battle to come. The landscape blurred as they rode through the countryside, the fields and forests passing by in a rush of shadow and moonlight. The farther they traveled, the quieter the night became, until only the rhythmic pounding of hooves and the soft rustle of the wind could be heard. After what felt like an eternity, the village came into view, a small cluster of wooden houses nestled at the base of a hill. Smoke rose from the chimneys, and in the distance, Elias could see the flickering glow of lanterns. The villagers were awake, no doubt having heard the news of the approaching Veilspawn. Valeria raised a hand, signaling the knights to halt. The horses snorted and pawed at the ground as the knights came to a stop just outside the village. "Spread out," Valeria ordered. "Form a perimeter around the village. We hold the line here. No Veilspawn gets past us." The knights dismounted, moving quickly to take their positions. Elias followed Alistair to the edge of the village, his heart hammering in his chest. He could feel the tension in the air, a heavy, oppressive weight that pressed down on him with each passing moment. The night grew colder, the wind biting at his exposed skin as he took his place beside Alistair. They stood in silence, waiting, watching the darkness beyond the village. The silver moon hung low in the sky now, casting its pale light over the fields, but there was no sign of the Veilspawn. For a moment, Elias allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, the reports had been wrong. Maybe the Veilspawn wouldn't come tonight. Maybe, a distant, bone-chilling howl shattered the stillness. Elias's blood ran cold as the sound echoed through the night, followed by another, and then another. The howls grew louder, closer, until the very air seemed to vibrate with the terrible noise. Elias gripped his sword, his palms slick with sweat. "They're coming," Alistair said quietly. Elias nodded, though his throat was too dry to speak. The first of the Veilspawn appeared on the horizon, a dark, shifting mass of shadows, barely visible in the moonlight. They moved like liquid, their forms constantly changing, twisting, as they surged forward. As they drew closer, Elias could make out more details: the elongated limbs, the gaping mouths filled with rows of jagged teeth, the glowing red eyes that burned with unholy light. "Steady," Alistair murmured, his sword drawn. Elias swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. The moment he had trained for, the moment he had feared. The Veilspawn charged. The knights moved as one, their swords flashing in the moonlight as they met the onslaught head-on. The clash of steel against flesh filled the air, along with the inhuman screeches of the Veilspawn as they were cut down. Elias swung his sword, his movements awkward and clumsy, but he managed to land a few solid blows, each one sending a jolt of adrenaline through his veins. But for every Veilspawn that fell, more took their place, swarming the knights in a relentless tide of darkness. Elias could barely keep track of the chaos around him, the blur of motion, the sound of battle, the screams of the dying. His breath came in short, ragged gasps as he fought to keep up, his sword growing heavier with each passing second. Suddenly, a massive Veilspawn lunged at him, its maw wide open, ready to tear him apart. Elias froze, his mind blank with terror. Time seemed to slow as the creature loomed over him, its red eyes glowing with hunger. Before it could strike, Alistair appeared at his side, his sword slicing clean through the Veilspawn's neck. The creature let out a high-pitched screech before collapsing in a heap at Elias's feet. "Focus!" Alistair barked, his voice sharp. Elias blinked, his body trembling as he stared down at the fallen creature. He had been moments away from death, and yet, he hadn't been able to move. Fear had gripped him, paralyzing him in the midst of battle. Alistair didn't wait for a response. He turned and plunged back into the fray, cutting down Veilspawn with the practiced ease of a seasoned warrior. Elias took a shaky breath, his heart still racing. He couldn't let this happen again. He couldn't freeze like that, not in the middle of a fight. He had to do better. He raised his sword and charged back into the battle, his movements fueled by desperation. Elias pushed himself forward, forcing his body to move despite the tremors in his hands. He charged toward the nearest Veilspawn, his sword slicing through the air. His strike connected with the creature's twisted torso, but instead of falling, it shrieked and retaliated, its spindly arm swiping at Elias with unnatural speed. He barely had time to dodge, stumbling backward and nearly losing his balance. His breath came in ragged gasps as he tried to regain control. The battlefield was a blur of steel and shadow, knights clashing with the nightmarish forms of the Veilspawn. Screams and roars filled the air, punctuated by the sickening thud of bodies hitting the ground. Elias gritted his teeth, trying to shut out the chaos around him, focusing only on the creature in front of him. The Veilspawn lunged again, and this time Elias was ready. He stepped aside, bringing his sword down in a powerful arc. The blade bit deep into the creature's side, and it let out a guttural wail before crumpling to the ground. Elias stood over it, panting, his heart hammering in his chest, but there was no time to rest. Another Veilspawn was already advancing on him, its glowing red eyes locked on his. Elias raised his sword again, but his arms felt like lead. Each swing was slower than the last, his muscles burning with exhaustion. Suddenly, a flash of silver caught his eye. Commander Valeria swept through the battlefield like a force of nature, her twin blades flashing in the moonlight. She cut down 2 Veilspawn in a single motion, her movements fluid and precise. She was everything Elias wanted to be, fearless, unyielding, a true warrior. But as he watched her fight, a new thought crept into his mind. What if he wasn't cut out for this? What if he didn't have what it took to be a Silver Moon Knight? Elias shook his head, trying to banish the doubts. He couldn't afford to lose focus now. The Veilspawn in front of him lunged, and he barely managed to parry the blow. The force of the strike sent a jolt through his arms, and for a moment, his grip on his sword faltered. The creature took advantage of the opening, slashing at Elias with its razor-sharp claws. Pain exploded in his side as the claws tore through his armor. Elias staggered backward, his vision blurring. He pressed a hand to his side, feeling the warm, sticky wetness of blood seeping through his armor. The world around him tilted, and for a moment, he thought he might collapse, but then, through the haze of pain, he heard Alistair's voice. "Get up, Elias. Don't let it win." Elias blinked, his vision clearing just enough to see the Veilspawn advancing on him again. Alistair was locked in battle with 2 more of the creatures, unable to come to his aid. Elias swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his ears. He had to fight. He couldn't let fear take over again. Gritting his teeth against the pain, Elias raised his sword. The Veilspawn lunged, but this time, Elias was ready. He sidestepped the attack and drove his sword into the creature's chest, burying the blade deep. The Veilspawn let out a final, shuddering gasp before collapsing to the ground. Elias stood over the fallen creature, his body trembling with exhaustion and pain. His side throbbed with every breath, but he forced himself to keep moving. The battle wasn't over yet. As he scanned the battlefield, he saw that the tide was slowly turning in favor of the Silver Moon Knights. Valeria's leadership and the Knights' coordinated efforts were pushing the Veilspawn back, forcing them toward the edge of the village. But Elias could see the strain in their movements, the weariness in their eyes. They couldn't keep this up much longer. Suddenly, a low, rumbling growl cut through the noise of the battlefield. Elias's heart skipped a beat as he turned toward the source of the sound. Emerging from the shadows was a Veilspawn unlike any he had ever seen, twice the size of the others, its body bristling with spikes, its red eyes burning with malevolent intelligence. It moved with a terrible grace, its massive claws leaving deep gouges in the earth as it advanced toward the knights. Valeria turned to face the creature, her eyes narrowing in determination. She barked orders to the nearby knights, forming a defensive line in front of the creature. But Elias could see the fear in their faces, the uncertainty in their movements. This was no ordinary Veilspawn. The creature let out a bone-chilling roar and charged. The knights met it head-on, but it was like trying to stop a storm. The creature tore through their ranks with terrifying speed and strength, its claws ripping through armor and flesh with ease. Valeria fought with all the skill and precision she was known for, but even she was struggling to hold her ground against the onslaught. Elias's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the battle unfold. He knew he had to do something. But what could he do? He was barely holding his own against the smaller Veilspawn. How could he possibly stand against this monstrosity? Then he saw it, an opening. The creature was focused on Valeria, its attention fully on the commander. If Elias could strike now, catch it off guard, maybe, just maybe, he could make a difference. Without thinking, Elias sprinted forward, his sword raised. His side screamed in protest with every step, but he ignored the pain. He had to help. He had to fight. The creature reared back, preparing to strike Valeria. But before it could land the blow, Elias lunged forward, driving his sword into the creature's exposed flank. The blade sank deep, and the creature let out a deafening roar of pain and rage. For a brief moment, the creature faltered, its movement slowing. Valeria seized the opportunity, her twin blades flashing as she struck, landing a series of swift, precise blows. The creature staggered, its massive form swaying as it tried to regain its balance, but Elias didn't stop. He pulled his sword free and struck again, this time aiming for the creature's neck. His blade found its mark, cutting deep into the creature's flesh. With a final, guttural roar, the creature collapsed to the ground, its body twitching before going still. Elias stood over the fallen creature, his chest heaving with exertion. His side burned, his vision blurred with exhaustion, but he had done it. He had fought, and he had won. Around him, the battlefield was quieting. The remaining Veilspawn, sensing the defeat of their leader, were retreating, their shadowy forms slipping back into the darkness. The Silver Moon Knights, battered and bloodied but victorious, stood tall, watching as the last of the creatures disappeared into the night. Elias staggered, his legs threatening to give out beneath him. Alistair was suddenly at his side, steadying him with a firm hand. "You did well, Elias," Alistair said, his voice gruff but filled with pride. "You fought with courage." Elias nodded, too exhausted to speak. His body ached, his side throbbed, but a deep sense of relief washed over him. He had faced his fear, and he had survived. Valeria approached, her expression unreadable as she looked down at the fallen creature. "We'll need to reinforce the defenses," she said, her voice calm despite the battle they had just endured. "But for tonight, we've won." Elias glanced up at the silver moon, now beginning its descent toward the horizon. The night had been long, the battle brutal, but they had done what they came to do. They had protected the village. They had held the line. As the knights began to regroup, Elias allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. He had come here filled with doubt and fear, unsure of his place among the Silver Moon Knights. But now, as he stood among his comrades, bloodied and bruised but victorious, he knew he had earned his place. That he was a Silver Moon Knight. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be more battles, more Veilspawn, more nights when the silver moon rose high in the sky, signaling the beginning of another fight. But Elias was no longer the uncertain young man who had doubted his ability to fight. He had faced his fears, both external and internal, and emerged stronger for it. The silver moon dipped lower on the horizon, casting its final light over the battlefield. As the first rays of dawn broke over the distant hills, Elias knew that this was just the beginning of his journey. There would always be new challenges, new dangers, but he was ready to face them, because now, he was truly a Silver Moon Knight.